All right. This is the Couch Scout Sports Podcast. We're back. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute, but you're back listening with Anthony Bills, Noah Ballwig. We're going to be covering some just getting caught up on sports, or I guess lack thereof. But the good news is that the NFL is coming up, and they haven't really canceled anything up to this point. So we're going to be just talking some dynasty type fantasy football questions. NFL free agency actually opens tomorrow, and there's this is actually probably one of the best free agent classes that there is. I mean, we talk about names like Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper, Austin Hooper. There's some really big names. So we're going to be covering, predicting where they're going to go, talking about their value in terms of fantasy, if you should be buying low, selling high. But Anthony, man, how are you? We're not in California anymore, down in the big old state.
We started this a little over a year ago, so it's nice to be back. I know I've been getting memories lately on my Facebook and Instagram of our posts.
Yeah.
It's got a few last week. It was the baseball podcast that we did last year, so it's fun and it's good timing. I feel like just because obviously all the sports are getting canceled for a while right now, so it's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
sports my life. So why not this? And for those of you that haven't done a dynasty fantasy league, do it. I did my first one last year because of Noah, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's year round. It's not that much hard work, but it is a lot of fun if you love football and you love to actually study it and do this. It's a lot of fun. You should join one, 100%.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Anthony, of course, he comes in, joins the league for the first time. We give him an orphan team that I literally think went like 2-13 or something. It was like 2-12, 2-13. Anthony comes in. The team has like 3 first-round draft picks, and he literally wins the entire thing in his first year. And I'm like, my team's sitting over here just stacked, and I get knocked out first round. Anthony comes in as the 6th seed, and he's got I think you were starting like Kendrick Bourne and Sammy Watkins, but
Yeah.
Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel, they came up clutch for you.
Yep, McCaffrey, Zeke, Samuel. Those are the guys. Jared Goff was just so bad.
Oh yeah. And then I traded him Derek Carr when like Derek Carr had like 2 good weeks, and then he literally had like 4 points the next week.
Yeah.
But
Well,
hey,
it was a lot of fun. It's the same cliche as all of sports. You get hot at the right time.
that's right.
And towards the end of the playoffs is when McCaffrey, Zeke, and Deebo Samuel were really, and Noah Fant. Once Drew Lock stepped in for the Broncos, Noah Fant was the top 10 pick everybody expected him to be. So
Right. And I think the thing that I love most about dynasty leagues is it keeps you so much more engaged throughout the college football season, because you almost act as like a scout for players coming in, because the opposite of a redraft league where you get a new team every single year. With dynasty leagues, you draft your team 1 year, and then the next year you keep that entire team, and you keep it, from year to year to year. So the only way that you honestly build is similar to an NFL team is through the draft, through making trades, through free agency. So it keeps you engaged throughout college football season, and then like the NFL draft or the NFL Combine, I probably this year I almost watched every single day, just because there's so many good prospects in this class that you just want to keep an eye on and figure out, like, okay, is this guy going to break out, year one, or is he like a late round rookie pick that I want to make? So that's what I love about it, is it just keeps you, it's year round, like one of the sayings that we have for dynasty is that there is no off season, and that's how it should be with sports, And honestly, right now with no baseball, no basketball, no hockey, no XFL, it's like I'm just spending a whole bunch of time getting my dynasty rosters ready for August and September.
Yeah, it's good. So we should all be on top of our game when the dynasty league starts.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, I have no excuses not to.
We shouldn't have anybody Nobody in the lineups that's going to put up a 0.
I shouldn't have any excuse to lose to Anthony again in 2020.
Yeah, I don't think I beat you though. I think we met once and you beat me. You destroyed me. I'm pretty sure.
Probably. But hey, when you're on the opposite end of the bracket,
yep, exactly.
Doesn't help me. And I had Lamar Jackson too. I think I was probably one of the only people in fantasy football that had Lamar Jackson and didn't even make the finals. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Gosh, Lamar Jackson. You got a stacked team. Very stacked.
Yeah.
Very stacked.
Well, anyways, let's get started on this episode. Like I said, we're talking about the incoming free agency class. Free agency opens up, I believe it's tomorrow, or it might even be tonight at like 11:59, at midnight. But it's either the 14th or the 18th. But either way, we wanted to get an episode in before that gets started, just to talk about some predictions about where we think that players might be landing, talk about their current value in dynasty leagues, and whether we would buy, sell, or hold them. Because the thing is with dynasty is that players' value goes up and down all the time. So you look at a guy like Antonio Brown at the beginning of the season, or I guess Antonio Brown with the Steelers. He's the number 1, number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. Gets moved to the Raiders, he might drop down 2 or 3 spots in that ranking, and then the whole debacle that happened, he gets cut, and so his value is falling and falling and falling. So all of a sudden you realize when you could have sold Antonio Brown for 2 first-round picks, now in most leagues he's not even being drafted in startup leagues. If anything, he's probably going like in the late 20th round for people who are still holding out hope that he's going to play. So it'll
even like Melvin Gordon last year. Sorry.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A
couple years ago, he was one of the top backs.
Yeah.
And now everybody's like, because Austin Eckler pretty much took over, and even Justin Jackson. I know a couple times you recommended Justin Jackson on our podcast last year.
Yeah.
I think it's Justin Jackson, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Like people like that, Le'Veon Bell. He's never really the Jets. It never really fit so far. So it's like it's been, even for me, Sammy Watkins. I remember week 1 because Tyreek Hill. There was no certainty about Tyreek Hill. And Sammy Watkins looked like
yeah.
Sammy Watkins is DeAndre Hopkins, and then 3 touchdowns week 1, and he had.
Yeah, I think I sold him to you after he scored 3 touchdowns, and then he had 3 touchdowns.
No, I had him on my team. I had him on my team for week 1.
Okay, oh, that's right.
You sold him in the preseason to me.
Yeah, when Tyreek Hill wasn't playing, I sold him, and then he had 3 touchdowns week 1 and 3 touchdowns at the end of week 16. So.
Yep, it's crazy.
That's how it goes sometimes. But so we'll get started with quarterbacks. And I'm actually going to share my screen with you, Anthony, so you can see what I got going on here.
Yeah. While you do that, I will say free agency is Wednesday, March 18th.
Okay, that is the 18th. Okay.
4 p.m. Eastern.
There we go. I'm jumping the gun.
No, it's all good. We all want it to happen. Trust me, especially myself.
Right.
So.
All right, you can see this.
Yes, sir.
Good, G. All right, so well, let's get started with quarterbacks. These obviously aren't all of the free agent quarterbacks, and there's likely going to be some more that might become free agents just based on where a lot of these guys land. But obviously we have a name in there like Tom Brady. You have a guy in there like Dak Prescott, who is, I think right now, like in dynasty terms, he's the 5th ranked dynasty quarterback, and there's a potential that he might not be a Cowboy in 2020. And I actually just wrote an article about the Cowboys, who they have like so much depth, and they're one of the best teams, but I think they have the hardest decisions to make in terms of fantasy, or in terms of just moves alone as an organization this offseason, which sucks because you want them to be able to sign all these really, really good players, but there's just not enough money to go around. So I guess let's start with Tom Brady. With what's going on there in New England? Where do you see him? I guess as a dynasty quarterback, and where are you predicting that he ends up, Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Dynasty, obviously, I mean, you know what? He's 43 now. So, and the last year, it wasn't all on him. He didn't really have many weapons. You
Right.
know, the Brown thing failed. Gronk left, obviously. Sony Michel, who you sold to me when he was hot and
Yep.
turned out to be a dud, he kind of failed. You know, the back part of the season never got going. But if you get Tom Brady in like a Chargers offense, you know, with those weapons, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, like you texted me earlier about them tagging him, so Hunter Henry will be back.
Right.
Eckler on a good deal, you know, not overpaying for a running back, and he's probably the best, if not, you know, one of the best receiving backs, and Tom Brady thrives with that.
Right.
So, you know, James White, Rex Burkhead, all those guys over the years. So, as a dynasty quarterback, you know, he's probably pretty low. Maybe not super low, but mid-tier, I would think, for me.
Yeah.
Just because you don't have that many years left with him, you know. But if you're in a win-now mode, I would wait and see, because if he goes back to New England, they're not going to help you win that much, depending on what they do in the draft and free agency with weapons. But if he gets somewhere like the Chargers, then I can see him bolting back up to MVP type. Maybe not MVP form, but, you know, putting up numbers in that offense.
Yeah.
He's not going to put 20 interceptions like Rivers, you know. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of, I mean, some of the key like names, I guess, have been the Raiders, the Chargers, as you mentioned. Um, I've heard the Dolphins. I'm trying to remember some other team names that I've heard, but
I mean, people have thrown out the Cowboys if Dak Prescott doesn't
right,
get.
I forgot about them. Yeah,
Honestly, to be honest, out of all the teams, I think the Cowboys are the best fit for Tom Brady because of that offensive line and the weapons.
yeah,
I just think it's going to happen, so I didn't bring it up.
yeah,
But
yeah. So Buccaneers would be a team in there as well. Like you look at the weapons, they obviously don't have a great run game, but they have a veteran coach in Bruce Arians. They have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, a good tight end, and OJ Howard. Even the Tennessee Titans has been a team that has been mentioned quite often. Like I think there was a video of Brady and Edelman like FaceTiming. What's that dude's name?
Mike Vrabel.
Yeah, Vrabel. And yeah, because Ryan Tannehill's an incoming free agent. We're going to talk about him in a second. But I think that's another team if they're able to sign Brady, sign Derrick Henry. Like Henry was the driving force of that offense for a majority of the season, and then you get Corey Davis, you have AJ Brown, and then you go get another weapon in the draft, and that's another good landing spot that you could be looking at.
Yeah, that's true too. And did the Titans still have Deion Lewis? Because I know Deion Lewis and Brady had a pretty good connection when he was in New England. I think they released him.
Yeah, they just released him
Okay.
this
Yeah.
week, I think. Just yeah, you can see this, right, Bills?
Yes, sir.
So this is just like a tool that we use at Dynasty League Football, and so what this is basically comparing is you can see in the left column the points per game rank of how Tom Brady finished. I guess since 2013 when we started keeping these stats, and then the next column over would be his average ADP, average draft position. And so you look at a guy like Tom Brady since 2013. He's actually performed considerably better than where he's been drafted, and I think a lot of that is like, this is the downside of his career right here, 2013 to 2019. So a lot of people saying he's getting older, they're not drafting him as early, so his ADP has dropped. But this is obviously why the Patriots have been successful, and why teams like dynasty owners that have had Tom Brady for so long have been successful, because you look at a difference of a 14 ADP, and he's the number 2 quarterback in the league. I just thought that was pretty interesting, and you'll see with some other quarterbacks as well, like in comparison with Tannehill. I think every single year except for 2019. It was the exact opposite. Uh, he was drafted fairly high, but his points per game rank was always like almost double from
Yeah,
off.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. He's reliable.
yeah,
He's only had one major injury, and that was a freak accident. Got his leg taken out. And,
yeah, and I think also I was actually surprised to see that Brady was the 16th ranked quarterback in 2019, which is actually pretty impressive considering his age and just
yeah,
it didn't seem like he was having that good of a season. But like if you're looking for a backup quarterback, or if you're playing like a super flex league or a two quarterback league, Brady is his draft position is dropping, but he still is putting up like top 15, top 20 quarterback numbers, and you can get him
yeah,
for fairly cheap, especially this offseason because so many people are most likely writing this off as his last season, I would say.
yeah.
Yeah. How about Dak Prescott? Dak Prescott. Dak
Man,
Prescott.
Dak Prescott.
You're obviously a Cowboys fan. What's the word in Cowboys camp and from Dak? I know they just sent him a new offer. What are things looking like in that situation?
Well, it's kind of been quiet, but every offer that the Cowboys have sent him, they keep declining. So I know the thing I read this morning, or a couple days ago maybe, the last offer that they sent him was in the Carson Wentz, Jared Goff range.
Yep.
They declined it. So um, they are obviously putting a lot of value on Dak, and but I know I saw something that came out today. Neither side is interested in a franchise tag. So this literally might go to Wednesday, to where the Cowboys send an offer and he either says yes or he says no, and then it just goes to free agency, and the Cowboys maybe try to move on and to the draft or something. But I think it's going to get done. Um, there's no way Jerry Jones loved Tony Romo more than any player ever, and Jerry Jones got rid of Tony Romo real quick for Dak Prescott.
Right.
So I would assume Dak Prescott's going to be back. So if he's back, fantasy terms, you said he was top 5, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's his current rank right now.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with it because honestly, if you look, so as a football fan watching the game and a Cowboys fan, I'm frustrated with Dak Prescott a lot. But as a fantasy owner, he puts up points.
Oh yeah,
He
100%.
puts up so much points because the Cowboys get in a hole a lot, and then he just throws them back, and he gets a lot of those, fantasy filler points like Phillip Rivers used to, like guys like that. So, I mean, I would assume that he can still do that, but I would assume his numbers, he'll be a little more efficient. He'll probably put up similar numbers, but even better because Mike McCarthy is.
Right.
Mike McCarthy. Him and Aaron Rodgers, they had a bad split, but they were a good pair for a while.
Yeah.
And, he's a great quarterbacks coach. So,
Yeah.
if Dak is back in Dallas, absolutely. If Dak goes somewhere else, I'd say it's a wait and see for me because I don't know. They're talking about Dak in Miami, and what I don't know. I mean, he's just going to be another Ryan Tannehill if you ask me.
Yeah. You just don't know, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, so. I think if you have Dak Prescott in a dynasty league, or if you're about to draft and you want to draft Dak Prescott, if he is a Cowboy, then absolutely, I have high value on him for dynasty leagues if he's a Cowboy. But if he leaves the Cowboys, then I got to see a year from him,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So Prescott, he finished third among quarterbacks in 2019, in as far as fantasy terms. He's actually been really efficient. In his rookie year, he put up 304 fantasy points and had 6 rushing touchdowns. The year after that was 284 points, and then 305. This year, his highest output was 371 points. So he took a big jump in 2019, and he actually rushed. In his first 3 seasons, he had 6 rushing touchdowns every season. This year, his attempts and rushing yards were down. Rushed for 3 rushing touchdowns, but he still had his highest output So I guess that just goes to show that he can use his legs, but he doesn't have to in order to be one of the best fantasy quarterbacks. And he's really shown a lot of improvement in his arm. And you talk about the weapons that he's surrounded with in Zeke, Gallup, and Amari Cooper. I don't know why you wouldn't want to play for the Cowboys at this point because those three weapons right there, and then you talk about maybe being able to sign a target like Eric Ebron or bring back Blake Jarwin, someone like that. I don't know why he
Randall
wouldn't. I don't
Cobb
know
as
why.
well.
Yeah, and Randall Cobb. Yeah, I don't know why
The
you.
Cowboys didn't use Randall Cobb last year that much. They only used him a couple times and he performed well.
Yeah,
McCarthy loves Randall Cobb.
yeah, and even I get the Cowboys have a good draft pick, and
Yeah.
this is a great wide receiver class. If they're looking, if they wanted to even move on from Cobb, who is a free agent, there's some great slot wide receivers that they could use some draft picks on, just to get some younger talent. So at this point, I'm like, hey, this is going to be your best option to win if you want to win. But if it's about money, he obviously might be going somewhere else.
Yep. Absolutely.
Alrighty, Ryan Tannehill. Let's talk about him for a second. What are your feelings on him? He obviously got traded from Miami to Tennessee, was the backup, and then comes in, steals the role from Mariota, leads the Titans to taking down the number 2 seed Ravens in the playoffs. He looked really, really good down the stretch, but then again, I mean, he worked for his contract that he's going to get this year, and it's a question of whether the Titans want to spend that kind of money on a veteran quarterback who really has only produced. I don't think he's ever produced even for a full season in his whole career. It's always kind of been like a second half effort. So, what are your thoughts on him going forward?
That's a good question. I'm not. I'm not real sure with Tannehill. It's so confusing because if you see, obviously Derrick Henry was unstoppable. So even teams would try to load the box against Derrick Henry,
Yeah.
and they couldn't stop him. So that just left it. That just left it wide open for Tannehill to have one-on-ones everywhere. And AJ Brown was a breakout beast.
Yeah.
Probably the best rookie wide receiver. Him and DK Metcalf, the former teammates. There was so many good wide receivers last year as rookies, but AJ Brown was amazing. Delaney Walker is still productive, but I don't know. I think it just depends on fit. If Tannehill's back in Tennessee, then I think so because obviously there's a comfort level there, and the offensive coordinator and variable, like they know him.
Yeah.
It's so tough because he was so up and down in Miami. So I just don't. I'd hate to see Tannehill get a big deal somewhere. Maybe not a big deal, but get overpaid, kind of like a Matt Flynn type contract.
Yeah.
And then beat out by Russell Wilson as a rookie. So it's tough. A lot of these quarterbacks, for dynasty purposes, it's kind of just a wait and see for me, just because we don't know where they're going to be. Like I said, if Tom Brady's in LA, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll take a couple years. If Dak's in Dallas, absolutely. If Tannehill's back in Tennessee, yeah. I lost in non-dynasty leagues, just regular leagues. I was the number 1 seed in 2 other leagues, and I lost in the first round because of Ryan Tannehill on the other team.
Right.
But like 40 points. I'm like, where is this coming from? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. If you look at, this is kind of what I was talking about. When you compare a quarterback like Tom Brady to Ryan Tannehill, if you look at his average draft position from 2013, really, there was 2014 when he was the 12th ranked quarterback after being drafted as the 14th ranked quarterback, and then this year he was almost undraftable. He's the 29th quarterback taken in drafts, and he produced as the ninth best in 2019, which is really impressive. But I think when you look at like from dynasty terms, Tannehill's actually a pretty good quarterback to get, just because people are going to be looking at these stats and being like, oh, he only produced for 1 year. I think the overall Consensus on Tannehill is still fairly negative. Um, he didn't even show up like in our in mock drafts until December of 2019. Like there was like a year from 2018 to 2019 that he wasn't even being drafted in startup drafts until this explosion in 2019. So that just tells me like the consensus is still fairly negative towards Tannehill, which means you can still get him fairly cheap, and he's gonna get a contract and he's gonna get a starting job. So that he's a guy that I'm like if I'm playing, especially if I'm playing in just a single quarterback league, that I feel like I can get for fairly cheap, maybe a late uh, third round pick, early third round pick in terms of rookie drafts. I think he's pretty comparable if you're looking to boost your quarterback talent there.
Yeah. Dude, what was his points last year? Is it on there? I think it was 9
Um,
per game.
he was
Yeah, see,
he was the 33rd ranked quarterback last year, and he only put up 154 fantasy points.
that's
That was in 11 games,
right.
so he missed
So,
5.
okay.
But he threw 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. This year was 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions.
So you say 154 points in 11 games?
Yeah, which
Just under 15 points a game.
yeah,
So, for somebody like me, he'd be great because Jared Goff was around the same. So it's somebody that's like right there in the mid tier that you can have to where you can like look at matchups throughout the week. Which one do I want to start this week? Compare.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And, that's good.
Alrighty, let's move on to next player in Ryan Tannehill. Um, sorry, Philip Rivers. We just talked. Yeah,
Daddy Warbucks, Mr. Daddy Daycare.
Mr. Daddy Daycare. Yeah. Um, moving on from the Chargers. What do you think? Where do you think that he ends up? Obviously, during the combine, there was a lot of talk about him going to the Colts.
Yeah.
But at this point, I don't know how much money he wants to make, but it doesn't really make sense. I think he like moved his family to Miami or something, or bought a house in Miami.
Yeah.
He's obviously not going to make a lot of. He's going to make some veteran money in 2019, but this is or in 2020. But this has got to be his last year. I don't know what you think about that.
So I think he's going to be wearing a suit and tie in a booth. To be honest.
The next
I'm just
Romo.
being real. I know Monday Night Football is interested in him.
He
They
could have
obviously whiffed on
his own
Tony.
camera crew with his whole family.
They whiffed on Tony Romo. I just don't think there's going to be that much interest for Rivers.
Yeah,
You know, you spend your career 16, 17 years with a team,
yeah,
and they're basically just like, see ya. We're about to bring in a dude that's 4 years older than you.
yeah, exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
So who's going to have interest in you? With all these rookie quarterbacks, and you see all these young quarterbacks are starting to take over the league, I just don't see any interest in him. Maybe somebody, gets hurt in training camp. I don't want that to happen, but
Yeah,
sometimes, and maybe somebody calls him, but I don't see a fit for him anywhere. I mean, yeah, Indianapolis, I guess, but is he an upgrade over Jacoby Brissett? Not for like a long time, not for a big future. So I don't know. So I would put Philip Rivers just on the bench.
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe he signed somewhere, but I just don't see it. I don't see a fit for him.
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. He's obviously had some really, really good seasons. He honestly was a quarterback that I always drafted
Yeah, same.
very, very late in in drafts. But I felt like every year I was always disappointed. Even though some of the numbers that I'm looking up here in 2017, he was the 11th ranked quarterback. In 2018, he was the 14th ranked quarterback. It always seemed like he would have games, and it was the case this year where he would throw like 4 interceptions, cost you a fantasy matchup, and then the next week throws like 6 touchdowns when you were already up by 100 points. You know what I mean? It just like he was never very very consistent and someone that you could rely on. It's just kind of like an emotional roller coaster with Rivers. One team that I could see, like, yeah, I don't think he's much of an upgrade over Brissett, and I think the Colts would be better just getting a rookie quarterback. You know, I don't see him signing with the Dolphins. A team that I could see grabbing him is the Buccaneers, just
But
because.
yeah, Bruce Arians. That's a
Right,
good fit.
right. Just because he probably would understand the offense well. He's got
Yeah.
weapons that surround him, and the Buccaneers could draft a rookie quarterback and sit him behind Rivers, for a season or two. And I think, in my opinion, Rivers and Winston have a similar game. They throw a lot of interceptions, but I think that just Rivers' locker room presence would bring something to that Buccaneers team that they've been missing for quite some time. So.
You don't like the eating the dub.
I'm over the dub.
Winston does.
I'm over the dub.
Oh man! If you guys are looking at me like I'm stupid, just go look it up. Jameis Winston eats the dub. Eats a W. Trust me.
Eating the dub and eating the crabs.
Did you see this? That's dub. What are you gonna eat? All right.
All right, let's move on to a guy I know that you really
Love
like,
Teddy.
Teddy Bridgewater.
I love Teddy.
What's your feelings on him? Obviously, it was kind of a bummer. Drew Brees came back, but also like that's a really good thing for the Saints. But kind of would have been nice to see him get his shot there. But what are you feeling?
So if anybody would go to Indianapolis, this is who I would want.
Yeah, I like
I'd love
that.
to see Teddy playing in Indianapolis. Because obviously he's used to the dome, Minnesota, and then New Orleans. I feel like Teddy has always been good to me. I feel like he's never gotten his fair share. I can't remember. He was in Minnesota at first, and he had to win the job. Who did he have to beat out? I can't remember. Was it Castle?
In Minnesota?
Yeah,
I think
and then he finally got the chance, and then he was balling, looking good, Teddy Bridgewater, and then blew out his knee or whatever it was
Yeah.
a few years ago. And then they're like, yeah, forget it. We're just going to move on, and here comes Kirk Cousins. And then Teddy goes down to New Orleans to back up Drew Brees. And Drew Brees just keeps adding on years to his career, which I love because I love watching Drew Brees. But when Teddy got in with New Orleans, I think they went undefeated, right?
Yeah, he's 5-0 as a starter.
Yeah, went undefeated. He didn't put up crazy numbers, but he put up, them. I don't know. I'm just guessing because I haven't looked at it. But I would assume he put up numbers similar to kind of what Tannehill and Brady would. That mid-tier, middle of the pack type quarterback numbers. And he doesn't really turn the ball over. So.
Right, yeah, he threw, and in those 5 games, had 9 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions, and completed 133 out of 196 pass attempts. So it was pretty good completion percentage, and he's not gonna, he's like you said, middle of the pack guy. He's not a Mahomes or a Lamar Jackson, but he's a great game manager, just a really nice quarterback that you can pick up. That was a bench player last year.
Right. And he's going to, maybe not 100% sure, but I'm really sure that he's going to get an opportunity somewhere,
Yeah.
I don't think he's not going to be back in New Orleans to be a backup. Maybe he will just because he loves New Orleans and he loves Drew Brees. He does love it there and he wants to be the guy, but so does Taysom Hill. And they put a really big tender on Taysom Hill, so I don't see them, bringing 2 backup quarterbacks. Maybe they do.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to see Teddy go somewhere, even if he could go with somewhere like New England. If Brady leaves, that would be amazing.
That is true. I
He wouldn't
actually
have the weapons, but
I actually like that a lot.
so, yeah, I love Teddy.
Yeah. Next is Andy Dalton, the Red Rocket, out of TCU, and it seems inevitable that the Bengals are going to draft Joe Burrow with the number 1 overall pick. It's either going to be Burrow or it's going to be Chase Young, and I don't think you can go wrong with either pick. But I think when you look at what Dalton has been able to do, or I guess lack thereof, been able to do in the playoffs, you kind of have to start fresh. And Dalton's actually been a fairly consistent fantasy quarterback. If you're looking at the chart, I would say he's there. There's nothing in there that like really jumps out at me that I'm like, oh wow, that was a really bad season, or that was a consistently great season. I think if you look at 2017, he was pretty far off. Though, finished as the 27th best quarterback. But it looks like like dynasty owners kind of have a pretty good idea of where to draft him based on the numbers that he's going to put up. And his rookie year he did great, and in 2015 he did great. But since then he's kind of been a middle of the pack towards the bottom tier quarterbacks, and he's actually had fairly decent fantasy weapons around him. And even now, he's going to get A.J. Green back. He's going to get a healthy Joe Mixon back. He's got Tyler Boyd. So I think either way, I don't think it's up to Dalton. I think he's on his way out. I think Joe Burrow comes in, and yeah, where do you have any idea of where you might see Andy Dalton going? I had some ideas of also with the Patriots. I thought maybe the Chicago Bears bringing Dalton in just alongside Trubisky to bring that veteran leadership and to bring in that competition for QB1. I could also see him going down to Carolina and competing for the job with in between Kyle Allen and Cam Newton. So, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, the first two teams you said, those are the main reports I've always seen. New England and Chicago.
Right.
I honestly see both of them because he's a locker room. Got baseball in the mind. He's a locker room type guy, and if you lose somebody like Brady,
Yeah.
Dalton's nowhere near Brady, locker room guy. He's not. But you need somebody that's going to step in as a quarterback and still try to lead that locker room, other than Belichick. So
Yeah.
see that. I could see him in Chicago too, just because when Trubisky is bad, they don't have an alternative, and he can really either make or break Trubisky. If you bring him in, it can really light a fire under Trubisky. Like, not that Trubisky isn't working hard, but it could be like, oh shoot, like they're bringing in a veteran who's been a Pro Bowler, who's been in the playoffs, multiple times. I gotta get my act together. Or I'm gonna be replaced. So, I like those. I don't know about Carolina. I saw in a report. I don't know how really true it was that Carolina is they're like trying to rebuild completely and tank for Trevor Lawrence because he's playing right down the road in Clemson. So
Yeah, I saw that as well. Makes
I don't
sense.
know how true it is. If that's the case, that sucks for Christian McCaffrey owners. Maybe it doesn't because he'll get the ball a lot. But it really sucks. Cam Newton isn't on our list, but that's another person. Like, honestly, out of all these quarterbacks, Cam Newton is somebody that I would love to see go somewhere.
Yeah.
Because I feel like he still has a lot in the tank.
Yeah.
He's did poorly in Carolina. I mean, he's an MVP a couple years ago.
Yeah. He's really been a player that has fallen off the deep end quick just due to injuries and I mean he has the number one fantasy running back, but
That's what's so upsetting.
that's not a part of his game.
Him and McCaffrey were going to be so fun together, but it hasn't worked out.
Right.
Yeah, Andy Dalton, New England, Chicago. That's really about it.
Yeah.
Surprise team picks him up as a backup. But yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to our last quarterback on this list here. He is a potential free agent. Bruce Arians backed him after in the 2019 season, but then he did finish the season with 30 interceptions and 30 touchdowns. An NFL, I think it was an NFL record, the first player to ever do that. 30 for 30. We'll be telling our kids about that one.
Mike Trout numbers.
Yeah. Do you think that he is able to stick around for another year, or do you think that they move on? Either way, it seems like the Buccaneers want to bring in either a young quarterback or a veteran quarterback just to bring in. They did have Fitzmagic but it seems like they want to bring in some kind of solidity to their offense. What are your thoughts on Winston?
I love Jameis Winston, but it's like this at Florida State too. I don't know why I don't know how it hasn't been fixed, but because you see some of the throws he makes, um, but then you see some of the throws he makes, and you're
Right.
like, so honestly, I think it's time for Jameis Winston to just be an XFL quarterback.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't really place any value with him. Maybe as a backup, for your dynasty league, just until you see that he's going to be the starter for Tampa or he's going to have a job somewhere, and then once he starts proving, that he's not Jay Cutler, Phillip Rivers, anymore. So where he throws for 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions.
Yeah.
And instead of having a 50-point fantasy day, you have a 20-point fantasy day because 5 turnovers.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
James Winston has so much arm talent. It's just frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's the most frustrating thing is he was a former overall number 1 pick, and it just seems like his talent, or at least like his, I don't know, like his focus just hasn't been there. But it seems like from all the coaches that he works hard, that he wants to improve, but we just haven't seen it. He put up 373 fantasy points in 2019, and funnily enough, if you're looking at this chart, I mean, almost every single year he's been drafted way higher than he's actually performed. Until this year, he was the 13th quarterback taken, and he finishes as the 8th ranked quarterback, and he still threw 30 interceptions. And it's like, I mean, even if he just cut down on half or even 3/4 of those interceptions, he probably would have been a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Right now, he's currently being drafted as in the 15th round of startup drafts, and for me, I think that's still a little bit high. I'd like to see that number. I'd like to be able to get him like in the 17th and 18th round, and I feel like in most leagues you might be able to, if it's like a single quarterback league, just because everyone's going to look at that 30 for 30 number. But yeah, I mean, even if he's got tremendous talent around him, so even if he can just find a way to just cut down, even if it's 25%, it would still make a significant difference.
Yes.
Of the 7 quarterbacks, if you could only pick one right now, regardless of situation, I think there's a clear answer of who you would pick, but which quarterback would you be drafting in like a single quarterback league as your number 1 quarterback?
Those free agents?
Yeah.
Out of all, or those free agents?
Just of these 7.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, probably Dak.
Yeah.
I'm not a biased one. Trust me, as a Cowboys fan, you guys will think that's a biased answer. I really don't like. I'm not happy with Dak as my quarterback just yet. So that's an unbiased answer. That's straight fantasy points production.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't realize I didn't. I was like, of these quarterbacks, and I wasn't even sharing the screen with
No,
you.
I remembered who they were. It's all good.
Yeah, I think Dak too. It's pretty clear. I mean, he's in his entering his 5th season, and he's the QB3 on the year. So
yeah. But real quick before we move on to the next position, so if you are starting a dynasty, you haven't had one yet. You're starting one. There's 2 quarterbacks that are obviously 1A, 1B. Which one are you starting with? Because we have Patrick Mahomes, you have Lamar Jackson, and obviously it's those 2.
Yeah.
Obviously, right?
Yeah.
So which one? Because I know you have Lamar. So with Lamar, you get the running threat on top of last year throwing for 250 yards a game or whatever it was. So
yeah. Oh, that's so hard. I'm just gonna pull up some rankings so I can tell you like where they're being drafted. I know it's Lamar Jackson. It's so close right now. It's Lamar Jackson with a 22 ADP, so he's being drafted like early to late or mid to late second round, and then Mahomes is 23.67, which is like a pick right after. I think for me,
That's crazy. Thank you. By the way, listen, people, when you're doing fantasy drafts, can you stop taking Patrick Mahomes in the top 3 or number 1 overall?
unless you're playing with me, then take him. I don't care.
I see that and I'm like, what are you doing? Every year there's these people that do that. I made the mistake when I first started playing fantasy football.
Oh yeah.
Peyton Manning first overall.
Yeah.
Hour after the draft, and hour after the draft is when Peyton Manning's neck was broken, whatever. So I'm like, crap. First of all, I just wasted my number 1 pick on a quarterback, which was stupid.
Yep.
Now my number 1 pick is out for the year.
Yeah.
So I was like, come on, guys. There's so much value in Christian McCaffrey and Julio Jones and all these other guys. Stop taking quarterbacks so dang early.
Yeah, I think.
When it comes to those two, I can understand it, I guess.
Yeah.
Because two are far above everybody when they're putting up fantasy numbers.
Yeah, so far above. I mean, the next quarterback is Deshaun Watson, and he has an ADP of 54. So you're talking like rounds and rounds later. Mahomes, I'm fine with Mahomes and Jackson being drafted there. I think.
Yeah.
I would pick Mahomes, just because of the arm talent and the he doesn't have to rely as much on his mobility. His arm talent compared to Lamar Jackson is just off the charts, and you still have
talent compared to a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's Hall of Fame,
He still has
Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre type.
Yeah, he still has a top 3 tight end in Travis Kelce, has a top 5 wide receiver in Tyreek Hill. He could. We're going to talk about running backs next, but he could potentially have a top 10 fantasy running back in 2020, which he didn't have literally all of 2019, and he still put up numbers and went on to win the Super Bowl. So I think I'm going there just because. I mean, Lamar Jackson is so much fun to watch. I think I love watching him play. I love watching him compete. But from a fantasy perspective, from a dynasty perspective, if I can have Mahomes for the next 10 years and literally not have to draft a quarterback until then, like that's what's great about quarterbacks in dynasty leagues is, they play for a long time.
Yeah, the durability seems like it should be with Mahomes longer. Should be. Doesn't mean it will, but it should be.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. So you're on Mahomes as well?
Yeah. I'm in Lubbock, Texas, bro. I have to be on Mahomes.
That's right. Yeah, Anthony's been a Texas Tech fan his whole life.
I can't stand them. I can't stand these Tech fans.
Did you see that one dude put in his yearbook from like, he's like, that went to high school with Mahomes, and they were like, what are you most looking forward to in the future? And he was like, Patrick Mahomes winning the Super Bowl or something, or like, I don't remember what it was. It's something where he like predicted it like when he was in high school, and then he got it. Like, that's crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah. All right. Should we talk some running backs? Let me pull up a list for you, so you know what I'm talking about.
Sorry, I was opening my candy bag, so I was muted.
Oh, there you go. All right.
Look at these running backs, man.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, this is probably the best running back class for as far as free agents, and this is only 7 of them. This isn't the exhausted list. This is just what I was able to like. These were 7 that I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like to talk about them. But obviously, number 1 running back on this list has got to be Derrick Henry. Would you agree with that, Anthony?
Absolutely. I mean, he ran for what, 2 Gs last year?
Yeah.
Right?
He led
the league in rushing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I guess let's kind of start. Let's start from there and then work our way down the list. As far as like ranking, how would you rank these running backs? I think we're both consensus number 1 for Derrick Henry. Are we going Gordon, Hunt, or Drake as the number 2?
Man, that is tough. So, well, I was gonna say, let's say they're all back in the same spot that they were last year, but Melvin Gordon obviously will not be. Um, so I don't know about talent-wise. Give me Melvin Gordon.
Gordon.
Yeah, I would. Talent-wise, absolutely Melvin Gordon, but I just don't know where he's going to be, so I don't know the fit. Fantasy-wise, I absolutely love Kenyon Drake in Arizona.
Yeah, I do too. I think if they can work out a deal, I think that he did great in the second half of the season and really fit into the offense.
It was
But I think Gordon offers a little bit more to an offense, just depending on the fit. Like if he lands in Kansas City or if he lands in Houston, I'll take Gordon. I'll take Gordon all day. But if he ends up going somewhere else, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, even Kansas City. You know, we mentioned that earlier this week.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would pay that for him, but I'd love to see Melvin Gordon playing with the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Kareem Hunt, obviously a couple years ago, you know, he was one of the top 2 or 3 running backs fantasy wise. You know, with the Chiefs. He's a backup now to one of the best fantasy running backs in Nick Chubb. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be another new system in Cleveland. So 3 straight years, Kareem Hunt's going to be in a new system. We'll see if the Browns, you know, use him. And it's not a guarantee that he'll be back in Cleveland, but I know the new, you know, head coach Stefanski said they plan on having him back. So
yeah.
Assuming he'll be back in Cleveland.
Wait, yeah. Question for you. Actually, I don't know what I don't know what I'm saying. What was the last thing you just said? I totally lost my thought.
Kareem Hunt, the head coach Stefanski of the Browns said they plan to tender him. So
right. Yeah, I actually. So I wrote an article as well. I think this might have been the same article I was talking about, just on fantasy, who like our fantasy free agents right now. And if you actually look at Kareem Hunt's production I think he played 10 games.
He was suspended for 8 games last year.
Yeah.
So he should have played in at least probably 8 games.
Yeah, it was 8, not 10. In the 8 games that he played, I think he actually outproduced Nick Chubb in as far as like if you multiplied his 8-game stretch into 16, he actually would have had a better fantasy year compared to Nick Chubb. But you know, obviously Nick Chubb's yards per carry average is going to decrease because he had 200 touches or whatever it was. Kareem Hunt, I think, only had just a handful of rushes, but he was the clear kind of Duke Johnson role in the Cleveland offense. He pretty much got every single receiving opportunity out of the backfield compared to Nick Chubb. So even if they do tender him and Kareem Hunt sticks behind Nick Chubb, I still think that he gets. I think he'll still be a top 25 fantasy running back. I would actually guess he'll be like a top 20 fantasy running back just in the offense in the passing game.
I love Kareem Hunt. When the Browns signed him, I was super excited. You know, I'm not like a big Browns fan, but from Ohio, obviously we've talked about it on this podcast. You know, I pull for him, so it should be a great fit. You know, that offense is with so many weapons, so they should all be putting up the numbers. You know,
Right.
Last year was just a fluke. It was a typical Cleveland thing. Now there's no expectations on them, so I would assume they'll be better. And hopefully Kareem Hunt can stay healthy, can stay with off-field issues, like put him to bed. So
yeah, I think that their offense gets turned around in 2020. I think that it's going to be. I mean, it's really a make it or break it year for Baker, and I think that this is going to be the determining year. So I think they're going to have to be firing on all cylinders. There's just so much going on in the whole organization in the past year. So I think they get it turned around in 2020. I think they compete with the Ravens for that title in the division. So let's say we got Derrick Henry 1, Melvin Gordon 2. Are we going Kareem Hunt 3, and then
I probably would.
Yeah.
Put Kareem Hunt in front of Kenyon Drake, just because Kenyon Drake's such a small sample size so far.
Right.
You know, he was a bust in Miami. He went to a new place and he was starting to thrive. So we'll see if they bring him back. Because his teammates on this list as well. So which one do they take, or do they draft a new running back? You know?
Yeah. What would you say of the bottom 3 running backs? Jordan Howard, David Johnson, Lamar Miller. How are you feeling on all 3 of those, and which would you rather own in terms of a dynasty league right now?
I'd probably take David Johnson, but it's kind of close between him and Jordan Howard. Lamar Miller he just keeps getting older, and another injury, crazy injury.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much value he has going forward, just because, other than Adrian Peterson, running backs die off quick. But I like David Johnson. Jordan Howard a couple years ago was a really good back. The thing with the Eagles don't use running backs very well. Other than LaShawn McCoy was the last one, they just keep using these running backs, and they never really let them get going. Jordan Howard would start a game for the Eagles. He'd have like 8 carries in the first half, and all of a sudden he'd finish the game with 9 carries because they went away from him. So now that Jordan Howard will be out of Philly, more than likely, on fit it might be. But I like David Johnson because I like David Johnson's ability to catch the ball.
Yeah.
Not just run it,
Okay.
So
Johnson,
David Johnson's
Howard.
just a few years removed from being a top 5 draft pick. So, yeah.
Alrighty, I'm just making a poll real quick for our viewers. I'm asking the question, where will Melvin Gordon play in 2020? And I'm going to put it between Houston and Kansas City because I feel like that's the 2 places that he's going to go. And I'm putting the poll on right now. So go ahead, and if you're watching this, go ahead and vote. We'll leave it up, so even if you're watching the stream later, you can still go on and vote as well. Okay, so Anthony, let's do this. We got 7 running backs on the left, and we got 7 teams on the right. Let's put a name to each team, just based on those. I would say those are the 7 teams that desperately need a different running back situation. So if you had to choose, where would you say that those are going?
Right. Let's see. Well, let's start with Melvin Gordon. You say Texans, right? Texans?
Yeah, I'm going to go Texans.
Yeah, let's do that. Put Melvin Gordon with the Texans.
Okay.
So, I feel like Derrick Henry has to be back in Tennessee, right? Do you think?
I don't see any reason why they would not.
Yeah. I mean, Todd Gurley, he failed his contract so far. But Zeke, he lived up to it last year with Dallas. There's no reason Derrick Henry shouldn't get the same treatment that Zeke and Todd Gurley got.
Right.
So I'll put Derrick Henry back to the Titans.
Okay. How about Kenyon Drake?
Yeah, I was trying to eliminate teams first. Oh, man.
All right.
Well, let's see. If the Cardinals aren't on there, so that means Kenyon Drake is going somewhere new. He ain't going to go back to Miami. I wouldn't think. I would love to see. I could see Kenyon Drake with either. Oh man, what about the other Florida team in Tampa?
The Buccaneers.
In Tampa?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they need that, right? They need a back. Who
yeah.
they have?
Ronald Jones.
Yeah, I like Kenyon Drake in Tampa.
Okay.
Obviously, depending on who they have at QB, but
yeah, I like that as well.
Another weapon. So Kareem Hunt. Honestly, it's going to be the Browns, but for the sake of this, I would love to see him back in KC.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I
Yeah,
think
I know because you talked about it the other day, so I was like, I'm going to put Kenyon Drake at Tampa and leave the Chiefs for Green. Um, so now we look at it. I'm thinking, so Lamar Miller had been a Dolphin. Maybe go back to finish his career in Miami. Maybe. I don't know. Um, what would you say?
Lamar Miller, Miami.
Or he could be a nice backup to Philip Lindsay in Denver.
Yeah, I think that. I think that's where I would see him
Yeah.
most. And then I guess the last two, I'd like to see David Johnson with the Falcons, just because he does add that receiving capability. Um, but I also don't see I don't see Jordan Howard getting signed by the Dolphins. But then again, they really have no running back. Obviously, I know they're really high on J.K. Dobbins and a couple other rookie running backs, so he'll most likely be that backup role. But I think that's what I would say: David Johnson, Falcons, and Jordan Howard, Dolphins.
Yeah, I was going to say David Johnson because he's not the same as Devontae Freeman, but pretty similar, you know, with their agility and the power and to be able to explode. So he fits that offense pretty well. But 80 catches better than Devontae Freeman, so he would replace Devontae Freeman really well.
Yeah. One thing that I did want to note, just for the listeners, was just the value of Derrick Henry right now. If you actually look at his value a year ago to this date in March, he was being drafted as the 50th overall player in most startups, which was usually like a early fifth round draft pick, and that was after he exploded against I think it was the Patriots in the playoffs last year, or no, it was the Chiefs. Who was it? I don't remember. But he had this huge explosion in the playoffs, and so his value jumped all the way up to 50. And right now, in the month of March, so a year later, his value is 18. So he's being drafted 18th, like on average, which is a mid to late second round pick. So even just like speaking to that to owners, like obviously Derrick Henry's a top 5 running back, but also his buying window I wouldn't say is necessarily open right now, just because he is about to get a huge contract, and players that have him aren't going to want to. They're either not going to want to sell because of the past 2 seasons that he's had, or they're going to want way more than you most likely are going to want to pay for him. So that's just one thing to note, is just to look at the trends of different fantasy players when you're getting into dynasty leagues and doing startup drafts, is just to see, okay, where's their value at now? Where has it been? What are the factors that I think might change that? Like especially a guy like Derrick Henry, who he's the 9th ranked running back now, and before he was really just. I mean, Deion Lewis was almost getting more touches than him about a year and a half ago. So just to see that improvement and just the value, if you bought him low a year ago, you now have you've almost doubled your capital in him. So I just wanted to touch on that for a hot second. You want to move on to wide receivers?
Let's do it.
Alrighty. Let me get them pulled up here. Oh, I'm still drawing on my screen. I'm like, what the heck? All right, wide receivers. Not a super strong class, but there is some decent value in there. Some pretty good names. What do you think the Cowboys do with Amari Cooper, Anthony?
I think he'll be back. All indications are they want him, and he wants to be there. So I think Amari Cooper will be back with the Cowboys. It's just waiting on Dak Prescott to see I think it's just kind of like, all right, which one are we going to sign long term this year, and which one are we going to franchise tag? And then, so if they get a long term deal with Dak done before free agency, on Wednesday, I would assume Amari's going to get franchise tagged right behind it.
Yeah.
If they end up not getting a deal done, then I could see them giving Amari Cooper the long term deal, and then franchising Dak, or walking away and addressing quarterback, in the draft. So, I think he'll be back in Dallas, and he puts up big numbers. He's one of the top fantasy wide receivers, and he had a few games last year where he was a no-show, which could cost you a couple games. But I don't think that's going to keep happening. He was dealing with injuries off and on last year, so he was kind of just like, it was just a weird season for the Cowboys, So, but there's still some good value there, whether he's a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2, he's still right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Michael Gallup has kind of taken over in Dallas towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
So they have a couple options, So it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, but I would think it's going to be a good thing because Mike McCarthy is going to want to get the ball out to all of these athletes. So.
Right. I think if you look at, either way, if they do let Amari Cooper walk, they're going to draft a receiver in the first or second round, and that could be CeeDee Lamb, that could be Henry Ruggs, it could be Jalen Reagor. I think either way, I don't think they can go wrong. I would love to see Cooper back in Dallas, but I totally understand it. It's like, there has to be enough money to go around, and if you can get a player who is durable, a rookie that's durable, that can come in and play that explosive role that Cooper does, I don't think I would be understanding of it for the Cowboys if they did have to let him walk. It is a business. A player that really did well in 2019 is Emmanuel Sanders. He actually, you know what? I think I got some stats for us. Let's see what we got here. Sorry, I didn't even share this list with you again. Okay, so this is this graph that you're looking at here. It goes Cooper, Sanders, Aguilar, Cobb, Anderson, Gabriel. So it doesn't go in order of this list here on your left, but it breaks down a percentage of how their fantasy points were scored based on either receptions, receiving yards, or receiving touchdowns. And I think it just kind of gives you a pretty good idea of like what type of production they give you. I think if you look at Taylor Gabriel on the far right, he obviously has the highest percentage of fantasy points based on his touchdown rate. So like when I see that, I'm like, okay, Gabriel, he had a decent year, but he also was kind of boom or bust in between each game, just based on if he scored a touchdown in that game or not. He wasn't a high percentage receptions leader. That most of the targets went to Allen Robinson and to Anthony Miller. And when I see a graph like that for Gabriel, it does kind of concern me because that you're not gonna if you look at Cobb, most of his points came from his receiving yards, and that's something that you can honestly depend on almost every single game for a wide receiver. I take the touchdown is usually a bonus. I think if we had like Will Fuller in this list, his touchdown percentage would probably be receiving yards and then touchdowns with receptions way down, because he's a deep threat guy and catches a lot of touchdowns for big plays, but he's not going to get you, like, if he doesn't catch the ball, he's not going to get you PPR points, if that makes sense. But I like the balance that you see from Amari Cooper, and it's very similar with Emmanuel Sanders. It's who I was talking about. So he had a great 2019 season, and gets traded from the Broncos. He's 31 years old, coming off a torn Achilles, and just starts lighting it up with the Broncos. Gets traded to the 49ers, and then steps right into their system, and does great as well. So he's actually a free agent. Do you think that the 49ers re-sign him? He obviously played himself into a better contract for 2020, but do you think he'll be back with the Niners?
Uh, you know, I mean, production wise, you would think the 49ers would want him back, but they necessarily need him, because they have a bunch of young guys that are stepping in and stepping up. Like Debo Samuel, obviously, he's way ahead of, I think, what everyone expected. We all knew the talent that Debo Samuel had,
Yeah.
but I think he overachieved. He definitely did because I had him on my team. And
Yeah.
he was one of my best wide receivers, which is crazy to say. And then Kendrick Bourne is there. They have George Kittle, so I'm like, and they have another wide receiver that they drafted as well, who was supposed to be the guy, not Debo Samuel just yet. What's his name? I can't think of it. From Baylor,
Yeah, it's literally
former quarterback, Jalen Hurd.
Yeah, Jalen Hurd.
Yeah, Hurd. So I mean, they have some receivers there.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would necessarily bring him back.
Yeah.
Maybe if they can get him on a cheap deal. But Emmanuel Sanders is at the point of his career where he probably wants to sign a 3 or 4 year deal to end his career, make sure he secures some money before, and he's not ready to sign 1 year player minimum deals just yet because he's still obviously productive. Look at that, he put up numbers with Amari Cooper so.
Yeah.
So Emmanuel Sanders he's been consistent for a while, other than that injury. But him and Demaryius Thomas used to tear it up in Denver together. So honestly, Emmanuel Sanders is somebody I would love to see go to New England if Tom Brady stays.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because they had Mohamed Sanu. They tried to make the trade. Mohamed Sanu got hurt. It didn't really work out. But, Emmanuel Sanders, Julian Edelman, Mohamed Sanu, N'Keal Harry up and coming. You finally have some weapons for Tom Brady,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think, he's definitely a great, it's incredible what he's doing at his age. I think that he scored more touchdowns this year than he will in 2020. I think he's he's obviously gonna hit some kind of regression. I don't see any way that he repeats his 2019 season. Like this was just really, really impressive, and he was doing great with Denver, but then he also came into a high-powered 49er offense that you had to account for Debo, you had to account for Bourne and George Kittle. So Sanders was able to get a lot of looks. The 5 touchdowns. I don't think it'll be 5 next year. It might be 3, it might be 4, but I would look for that to decrease coming up in 2020. So he's definitely a really, really good veteran receiver that in dynasty leagues you can draft significantly late, which is really, really nice. So if you are doing a startup draft and you're like let me see where he's actually being taken.
Would you say like around 10th round? I don't know.
I think probably even later than that. Let me see.
Yeah.
Here we go. He's ranked right now as the 61st best wide receiver, and his ADP right now is 182. So you take that and divide it by 12, and it's like a 16th round pick. So by then you should have all of your starting receivers picked, and you can still get a potential wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 in the 16th round for maybe 1 or 2 more years. That's a really good value for free agents.
Yeah.
Okay, next another Cowboy, Randall Cobb, and I don't know. I guess we kind of already talked about him. Like he did add some pretty good value for the 49 or for the Cowboys in 2020. He's definitely aging, but he is back with Mike McCarthy, and we know that he thrived in Mike McCarthy's offense out of the slot for
Yes.
many years. So he's a player that I could see taking some kind of discount to get to be able to stay with the Cowboys, and I think he would actually. I mean, he had what 55 receptions, 828 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I would say
Yeah.
that he could probably have pretty comparable numbers to that in 2020.
Yeah. I would. I'm surprised that he had that many um, receiving yards and receptions. I'm going to be honest,
Yeah,
because all year, my dad and myself, we were watching the games, and it's like, why did we sign Randall Cobb if we don't use him?
right.
And I look at this, you'll think they're going to use him, or you'll think that they actually used him, because his stats are very comparable to Emmanuel Sanders, right?
Yeah,
And we just talked about Emmanuel Sanders was really good last year, So I mean, the receptions does Sanders say 65 or 55 receptions?
66.
66 receptions,
Yeah,
97 targets. So 14 more targets, 11 more catches. And if you look at it, it's very similar.
yeah,
And we as Cowboy fans, everybody thought Randall Cobb was underutilized. So with that being said, honestly, in Mike McCarthy's system, and Cobb's numbers could go up from this
yeah,
because we all thought he had a down year last year. I'm surprised that he had that many catches and yards. It didn't feel like it.
yeah,
Obviously, a lot of them, like I said earlier, with that came in late game situations where the Cowboys are getting beat and they're trying to come back. So it's just a bunch of dink and dunk passes and fantasy filler yards. But Randall Cobb still has a lot left. There was when he did get the ball, you still seen that closeness that Randall Cobb has out of the slot, like you say. So I'm very excited if he's back in the Cowboys and if he's back with Mike McCarthy. Um, you'll be able to get him late, very late in the draft. I would assume.
yeah. I think one thing. I mean, one thing to note is Cobb played 728 snaps in 2019, which was more than he had in the last 4 years. And he also his 828 receiving yards was his most since 2015. And I think really, the biggest thing was the difference between him and Sanders was really this right here was that Sanders 15% of his points came from touchdowns. Cobb he had two less touchdowns, dropping him to 11%. So I think if he had found the end zone once or twice more, we'd be having the exact same conversation with Sanders.
Yeah.
And depending on what kind of contract that they do sign him to, depending on what does happen in the 2020 season, he could be a trade target for teams depending on how he's doing in the McCarthy offense. All right, this can be brief on this guy, Devin Funchess. Didn't really. He came from Carolina over to the Colts, and he really didn't do. He would the Panthers were really high on him when he started his career, and he was actually a player that I had drafted fairly early, and he just really declined. Just wasn't able to stay on the field. Had a lot of drop problems. Comes over to Indianapolis, and he doesn't play hardly at all. He had 3 catches on 5 targets, so I didn't even include him in that graph because I don't think he actually qualified. But did you see anything? Do you see anything in Funchess that you're like, oh, maybe I could see him going to this team and resurrecting his career, or are you kind of writing him off?
No. Listen, I'm going to tell you this right now. If you are going to draft an offensive player from the university up north of Ohio, it is going to be a failure. Just being honest. So defensively, absolutely. They're defensive guys coming in the league and they thrive. But when was the last time a Michigan player offensively in the NFL? Tom Brady? Like,
Tom Brady. Yeah.
So it's just that, obviously I'm joking here because I'm a big Ohio State fan, but remember seeing Devin Funchess at Michigan. He looked really good, you know. Um, and then he's been nothing in the NFL, obviously, you know. But he was a tight end at Michigan as
Yeah,
well, and trying to move to wide receiver. So,
that's
you know,
true. Big he's a big frame guy.
yeah. So that was maybe Devin Funchess failed because of the Panthers. You know, maybe they should have let him try to play tight end. And you know, he could be the type of tight end that is in the NFL now. You know, the NFL is different. It's changing. You know, where the tight ends are running 4.45 round. You know, 4.5s at 250 pounds. So I don't know. I mean, if you get to a point where you have to pick Devin Funchess, you're probably gonna have a bad year. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You know, but I mean, fine, I guess if it's, you know, the last round of the draft and you're stacked at wide receiver and you're like that, or you're not stacked at wide receiver and you just need like a filler maybe to play on a couple bye weeks,
yeah,
sure, give him a shot. But I mean, I don't know. He was also hurt, so
yeah. I think I saw something the other day, and I think probably what did me wrong was Devin Funchess never ran a 40-yard dash in the combine. He had all the measurables of Calvin Johnson, and there's only been two players at the size of Calvin Johnson to run I think a 4.4 40, and it was Calvin Johnson and Chase Claypool, who's in this 2020 class at their size and their height. So honestly, now that I'm looking, I'm like, oh, that's like why did I draft him at that size? And then I saw they never actually had a draft time for him or a 40 time for him. But like guys that big, it's kind of like the Calvin Benjamin, like guys that were that big. It's funny because they both went to the same team, but like really really big guys, but they just have trouble getting off the ball and having consistent seasons unless they are just freak athletes like Calvin Johnson, who could not only jump above guys, but he could run past them easily.
yeah.
All right, enough about Funchies. Uh, Taylor Gabriel. This was actually a guy that I was kind of surprised to get released by the Bears, but he's going to be a free agent. He, I was surprised that he had the season that he did because he actually had a really, really strong 2018 season, but this year only 29 receptions, 353 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And kind of like I said before, just looking at that graph, I'm like, okay, he was definitely a boomer bust guy. If he wasn't catching touchdowns, he was definitely having a bad year. And then you look at the stats, and yes, he was. But Gabriel's a guy that can play the slot, and he has pretty good hands. I think he just needs to find a new offense and a new fit, and a team that I see him going to. I know the Eagles are looking for a new guy to play the slot, and I think that they'll actually go in the draft and get a guy like KJ Hamler or KJ Hill. But Gabriel's a guy that I could see going in there and fighting for that position with the Eagles as well. Is he a guy that you have that you know much about or that you'd like to see go to a certain team?
Yeah, I honestly, the 49ers move on from Emmanuel Sanders, and I think they could get Taylor Gabriel at a cheaper
Yeah,
rate.
yeah,
Because Taylor Gabriel was really good in Atlanta. And
yeah.
he's the offensive coordinator, Kyle Shanahan.
Right.
So he fits Kyle Shanahan's offense. I feel like it would just he'd be a really good change of pace guy, because they have, like we already mentioned them, Debo Samuel, who can do all kinds of things. The reason the 49ers were so, good this year is they had so many different guys that do the same thing, so you never knew what was coming at you,
Yeah.
Having Mostert and Samuel, all these guys taking sweeps, taking reverses, taking runs, doing all these random things, and Taylor Gabriel's just another guy that can do that.
Yeah.
Also separate and make plays down the field, which is going to just open the field up more for George Kittle.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's a great point.
Gabriel to go to San Fran.
And yeah, that's a great point. And just like from a dynasty perspective, right now he is His ADP is 238, so he's almost not even being drafted in most leagues. So even if you're in a dynasty league right now, you probably could find him on the waivers if it's not a very deep league. So that's putting him in like the 20th round of startup drafts. But what's so important about dynasty leagues is like over the course of the summer, like you have to pay attention to all of these free agent signings, to the rookie drafts, because players' value can shoot up in literally a matter of days. So if Gabriel does get signed next Wednesday by the 49ers, like I would think twice about dropping him from my roster just because I'm like, oh, I want to see what he's going to do. Whereas like right now, if I didn't know this about Shanahan, I'm like, oh, I think he's a wash. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like players' situations change so often just based on coaching, and like even you look at like what Shanahan has done with the 49ers. It's really important to just see like the connections that players have with coaches, like a guy like Tevin Coleman. He was a beast in Atlanta with when Shanahan was with the Falcons, and Shanahan's like, that's who I want. He brings him over, and Coleman has a decent um, a decent fantasy football season. Obviously, we didn't see Mostert exploding and coming up, but just things like that. You have to look at player-coach relationships, or if honestly, my advice is any player that's in the Adam Gase regime, I'm just dropping or trading immediately because you look at like Kenyon Drake, the second that and Devontae Parker, the second that Adam Gase left, Devontae Parker has a top 10 fantasy season, and Kenyon Drake goes to the Cardinals and uh, just has like the best year of his career. So it's things like that. Like when guys get a fresh situation, people's hope increases for them. So I try to. Usually it's around this time of year where I'm trying to make trades and buy players while their value's low, and not so much the other way around.
Yeah, very smart. It's good.
Okay, next receiver is Robbie Anderson for the New York Jets. Like we just talked about, Adam Gase. Um, he's kind of like a poor man's Deshaun Jackson, a really really speedy guy who goes down the field and catches deep balls. He's a bit touchdown dependent, but I've actually been fairly impressed with his ability to get production in their offense over the last couple of years, just because they've had terrible quarterbacks and a terrible offensive system. So in 2019, 52 receptions, almost 800 yards, 5 touchdowns. His receiving touchdown percentage, 18%. That's pretty good. I would like to see him catch a few more. I mean, for how much he was used, he only had 52 receptions on 96 targets. As a as a yeah as a clear wide receiver one. So we would like to see that number go up and see him get higher usage. But I don't know. Do you, Anthony, see him going anywhere outside of New York? And what kind of offense do you think that he fits into?
No, I think he clearly has to be back in New York for the sake of Sam Darnold. Um, they need to keep him. And I would assume that him and Sam Darnold, they'll get better together. As soon as the ghosts stop defending Robbie Anderson.
Yeah, right.
Sam Darnold. I mean, Sam Darnold's going to keep getting better. I'm very confused by Sam Darnold because I watched him absolutely dismantle the Cowboys last year.
Yeah.
And it looked like Sam Darnold was going to be the guy that a lot of people thought coming into the draft. And then the rest of the year, he was just so bad. But Robbie Anderson will be back in New York. You can't let him go. That's the only weapon. They have Le'Veon Bell, yes, but that's the only weapon they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
If he does walk, I think a good fit for him. You alluded to Deshaun Jackson. I think he would fit very well in Philadelphia. But honestly, any wide receiver that is in the NFL with a name could fit for the Eagles right now because they literally have nobody. They just can't stay healthy. But I feel like he would fit very well with Carson Wentz. So I don't think it will happen. I think he'll stay with the Jets. dynasty wise, I mean, he's still. I don't know what the average draft position is. I mean, I don't know if you might have alluded to it. Sorry, I was looking at something.
Right now, he's a 60. He's the 46th ranked wide receiver and being drafted. His ADP is 100. So I mean, he's not high up there, but he's definitely not like he's a ninth round pick. So it's not a
Yeah,
that's pretty decent value for what he's put up. Over
yeah,
the last 3 years, his receptions have been 63, 50, 52, with 7 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns, and 5 touchdowns. So I mean, honestly, I think he's due. He hasn't proved that he should get a big contract this year, and I think he's due for a breakout season coming up. But I do think he is kind of locked in. It seems like he's locked into that 50, 60 reception range, with not a very high catch to target percentage, I would say.
well, yeah. That's the thing. You see the targets. The targets are there. So if he can get into that range, like you see, Emmanuel Sanders caught. They had the same amount of targets, and Emmanuel Sanders caught 14 more balls. So if you add that 14 more catches, that's another probably 100 to 200 yards. He might be a 1,000-yard guy and maybe a couple more touchdowns.
Yeah.
So I mean, the value is there. We just need to see it happen.
Right.
So.
And another guy who, and this is with all serious insensitivity to the coronavirus, but another guy who there's no way he could catch the coronavirus is Nelson Aguilar, who has struggled so much in Philadelphia with drops. Had probably one of the worst seasons coming into his contract year. I don't see there's any way that the Eagles re-sign him. I don't think that the Eagle fans will let him. And yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I'm not sure what type of team would be looking for a slot receiver like him who just hasn't. I mean, he's shown flashes, but he hasn't shown that he can be consistent. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, agree, 100%. And I mean, it was kind of. I feel like it's a little unfair on Aguilar in Philadelphia because he was supposed to be, number 3 guy, really, and he got thrusted into the role because of Alshon Jeffrey and Sean Jackson.
Yeah.
So like he got thrusted into that number 1 like main guy, facing the top corner each week. So I mean, Aguilar he has the talent. He comes from USC where that's one of the wide receiver factories in the country. So I mean, if he can get to a spot where he doesn't have to be the guy,
right,
then I think yes. But I mean, if he's a wide receiver 3, 4, so I don't know. And if you can get him late, then yes, I wouldn't draft him too high until he proves it a little bit more. Because like you said, the drops, many drops. That Deshaun Jackson or Alshon Jeffrey usually catches deep downfield for a touchdown. So
yeah. I think his ADP right now is 234. So another guy who's on the bottom end of most startup drafts. He's likely available in leagues that are, I would say, like 25, 26 to 25 man rosters. But yeah, same thing. Like he has actually had to be the guy in Philadelphia because their receivers have been injured so often. So it's one of those situations where he could get like just a fresh situation could completely change what he does if he comes in as like a wide receiver 3. So I mean, he's definitely a guy. If he's a free agent and you're in the off season and your rosters are expanding, I wouldn't mind trading for him. If someone's willing to trade like a 4th or 5th round pick, or if he's available, I'd pick him up just to stash over the off season to see where he lands.
Yeah, I'd like to see him in like New Orleans.
Yeah.
Like the 3rd option in New Orleans.
Yeah, I like that a lot actually. All right, let's move on to our last position, which is the tight ends. We found out today that one of those guys is actually going to be back with his team, and that's Hunter Henry, so we can cross him off the list. He gets franchise tagged by the Chargers, so we'll have to wait another year. But Austin Hooper is definitely the number one guy on this list, and I would say it's pretty likely that he's just going to sign a huge contract in Atlanta. But anything can happen if they decide they don't want to have two big contracts with Julio Jones and Hooper. He could end up going somewhere else. But yeah, let's start with Austin Hooper, and what are your thoughts on him right now?
Dude, there's so many options for him. If the franchise tag doesn't come from the Falcons, because you look at teams, a lot of teams who need tight end are teams, um, like the Redskins, Jordan Reed. They moved on from him. You got Packers. They just moved on from Jimmy Graham. I know they have Sternberger.
Yeah, Sternberger. Yeah.
Last year, you got the Cowboys. Jason Witten, most likely gone. They're going to bring Blake Jarwin back, but he hasn't really proved anything to be the number one guy yet. So it's potential.
Right. Yeah.
You got the Patriots. They need Tom Brady to stay. Tom Brady excels when he has a good tight end. So do they entice him? So there's a lot of options for Austin Hooper. So I think wherever Austin Hooper goes, he's going to be solid. He's going to be a very, very, very good pick, a good value wherever he is at, because he's going to. There's so many options for him that he's going to end up going somewhere where he's going to be used, and he'll most likely be with a good quarterback, whether it's still in Atlanta with Matt Ryan, who uses him a lot, or moves on somewhere else. But I like Austin Hooper a lot. He's kind of been up and coming the last few years, and he's to that tier now where he's up there in that upper echelon. So
yeah. Right now he's ranked sixth among tight ends in terms of fantasy. Obviously behind like Ertz, Kittle, Kelsey, Mark Andrews, but
those guys are all freaks.
Yeah, right. Let me just grab his ADP real quick. It's so he's like a 7th round pick, which actually for startup drafts, he's only 25 years old, which it's around. I would say it's around the 7th or 8th round pick that I'm going to grab a tight end, unless you're going Kittle or Kelsey, who are going to go way earlier. So a pretty good value right now in startup drafts, and coming off 2 seasons, he almost had 100 targets last year. He had 97, and he caught 75 of them, which is amazing. And the year before it was 88 targets for 71 receptions, 6 touchdowns this year compared to last year, which was 4, which put him over the top. So that put him over the top, and I'm not sure where he goes, but I'd like to see him back with Atlanta just because I think he's got a good system there, but we'll see.
Yeah, he's an exciting player if you can get him, like you were saying, in that range.
Yeah.
It's honestly probably a steal at this point because his numbers keep getting better, and you see it's around 80%. Targets to catch rate, it's around 80%.
Yeah.
Gonna make it. So he's gonna catch his targets. So
yeah.
So he's gonna consistently give you points every week.
And next, I'm back to wide receivers. I think another thing too is for Hooper, just like his ADP right now, 77. It's probably not going to get any lower than that, just because he is about to sign somewhere. And I think no matter where he signs, whether it's in Atlanta or if he gets a big contract somewhere else, it's going to be with a team that needs a tight end where he can be the number one tight end option. So his ADP is definitely, it's either going to stay where it's at or it's going to climb. So if you are trying to buy right now, I definitely would go for it. I'd go for it now, just given, his age. He's 25. He's a young tight end. He's not injury prone like, some of the guys on this list. Jordan Reed, Eric Ebron, Hunter Henry. So, I really like him. I would love to have him in a dynasty league. Unfortunately, I don't own him in any. Next, Eric Ebron, a guy that we just talked about. I know he's a potential guy that could be coming to Dallas. But he had a great 2018 season, and then really did nothing in 2019, which was kind of a letdown. But also, that's kind of been the roller coaster of his career, if you could call it that. What do you think that he should end up with the Cowboys? Do you think they could utilize him well, or what are you thinking there?
I don't think so. I really like Blake Jarwin. You know who they have. So and Jason Witten was probably always he was used so much. So I just I would like to see Blake Jarwin used in that role because Blake Jarwin, when he got some targets last year for the Cowboys, he actually showed some great hands and some great athletic ability after the catch. But I don't feel like they need to bring in somebody like Ebron. Somebody like Ebron, I feel like could thrive in an offense like. I'll keep going to it, but that's just because Gronk's gone. So anytime there's a tight end, I feel like we got England.
Yeah.
And I feel like if he was with Tom Brady would really help him out a lot.
Yeah.
It really helped out Martellus Bennett. When he was Martellus Bennett was very similar to Ebron, not the attitude, but just the up and down. Like there's talent, and then wow, he looks like he's bad again. Up and down, up and down. And then he got to New England, and it was a short while, but he looked very, very good in that short while because of Tom Brady.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Tom Brady, if Tom Brady's back in New England and they could bring Eric Ebron, I'd like to see him there.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Ebron quite a bit, and I also think like the Bears, they have Trey Burton, who was supposed to be the next Travis Kelce, but really hasn't formed into who he's supposed to be. So, we were talking about Hooper. I've heard that the Bears could go after Hooper, but also I think that the cheaper option would be Ebron, and he could be, he could have some nice value there. I think when you look at his value right now, you can pretty much trade for Eric Ebron for next to nothing. And last year at this time he was a 7th round pick, and now he's a 20th round pick, and he's still ranked as the 21st best tight end. So, if you're a dynasty owner and you're looking for just kind of like I don't know if he's a reliable starting tight end week in and week out, but he has proven, from year to year that he can be at times. So, if you have, if I had one questionable tight end, I'd go ahead and go out and get Ebron for a cheap price just to pair the two, and you maybe play with your lineup every couple of weeks to get that figured out. But I mean, he has proven he did in 2018 did put up 220 fantasy points as a tight end. So he has his upside. It's just a matter of his situation.
Yeah, he does. And I just don't like his fit in Dallas just because Dallas has too many weapons already, so I feel like he just wouldn't thrive there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next is Jimmy Graham. We just got a couple more tight ends, and then we'll wrap it up. Jimmy Graham gets released by the Packers. He didn't really. I don't know. I feel like it's really hard for veteran tight ends to come into, like, veteran great receiving tight ends to come into the Packer offense and to thrive. And I think that's what we all thought that Jimmy Graham was going to be, but he really never came into that reliable role, especially from a fantasy perspective with the Packers. And I think it was just like he is old. He's lost that bounce and that speed that he showed in Seattle and he showed in New Orleans. So I don't know. I mean, I've had him on 2 rosters in the last couple of years, and he's disappointed me in both years that he was with Green Bay. He would have like one game where he would put up like 9 points, and I'm like, okay, like not bad. And then the next game puts up like 2.3 and just ruins your weekend. But do you have any idea of where you might see him go? I can't imagine that he's going to be a tight end 1 anymore at this point, but he still could add some depth to a roster.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly I don't know. Obviously, it's really fresh, so there's probably not really any interest in him just yet. But I think he could be a tight end 2 somewhere. A backup tight end somewhere.
Yeah.
Even he could be. I know the Falcons wanted him a few years ago, and this was before they got Austin Hooper, or before they knew Austin Hooper was going to be what he is. So I mean, maybe in Atlanta, just as a red zone guy to give, or to take some heat off of Austin Hooper and Julio, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe a reunion in New Orleans is what he needs. He
Yeah.
thrived on Payton and Drew Brees. Yes, he's not that same receiver. He's lost the steps.
Yeah.
But he could still tight ends. I mean, Jason Witten proved it last year. Was he great? No, but Jason Witten consistently caught first down passes last year for the Cowboys.
Yeah. Still be reliable.
And had touchdowns. So
yeah.
And he still has way more steps than Jason Witten does. So
yeah.
Back in that offense where you're comfortable, maybe. But I don't know. I mean, I would stay away from Jimmy Graham. Draft wise,
1,000%. I mean, he's touched down. Yeah, I'm thinking Chargers. That's what I was thinking. Like just because of the injury concern that there is with Hunter Henry, and I think he'll be a guy that waits to see where the quarterbacks land because I could see him going, wherever Tom Brady goes, just being a valuable receiving tight end in the red zone and just like allowing that to be his role because he really was he wasn't valuable at all outside of the red zone with Green Bay. His first year with us had 91 targets, 55 receptions. Last year was 63 targets, 38 receptions, and 5 touchdowns combined in 2 years. So he was really just touchdown dependent and wasn't doing much like in PPR formats. There was another team that just came to mind that I thought of as well. Delaney Walker just got released by the Titans. I could see Jimmy Graham signing there with the Titans. They're kind of similar players, but I think Graham is a little bit more durable than Delaney Walker. So he's a player that I could see just them adding him for veteran presence. But it'll be interesting. I think his run as a relevant fantasy tight end's kind of over, but still touchdown dependent. All right, a couple more to go. Jordan Reed gets released by the Washington Redskins. I've heard that he's very interested in signing with Seattle and kind of playing that backup role. But I think at this point Reed's a player that I'm not touching, just simply based on his injury past. And you really have to feel for a guy because he was for a couple of years just one of the most dominant receivers or dominant tight ends in fantasy football and just football in general. But the concussion issues that's really sad. Like the fact that he misses entire seasons because of concussions. It brings up that question of like when does a guy call it quits? But I think it's pretty evident that he loves playing football and wants to keep going. So him and Greg Olsen in Seattle, I could see it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for Jordan Reed. I draft him almost every year in non-keeper leagues just because I'm like, if he can, because you can get him late, maybe not super late, but you can get him in a good position, and it's like, hey, if he stays healthy, this is a steal,
right?
Because he is a beast,
Yeah, if
he has the talent like George Kittle and them do, he has that Travis Kelce talent. He just can't stay healthy. It's very unfortunate. I'm not too mad because the Redskins are in the division with the Cowboys, so I don't have to worry about him torching us. But as a fan and a fantasy owner,
it
sucks for Jordan Reed, and just as a human being, because you hate to see a guy that loves the game and can be one of the best in the league, and he can't perform.
Yeah,
just because of bad luck, So.
Yeah, he's another one of those guys, ADP of 226. So he's down there in the bottom of the bucket. You could most likely trade for him for like your lowest pick, or he's probably available in most leagues. But it would be cool to see him have a resurgence year and then hang it up. But definitely not a player that I'm going to invest in whatsoever. Vance McDonald, I feel like a guy that hasn't actually got a whole lot of hype coming into the free agent period here, leaving Pittsburgh, and he actually had some pretty good seasons there when Ben Roethlisberger was playing. But I don't know. Do you got any thoughts on him? I honestly think that the Steelers are just gonna strike a deal with him and re-sign him. But
Yeah, so because him and Ben have a pretty good connection when Ben was playing, so um, I would assume that he'll be back there. Ben's going to want him, so
yeah,
he's losing every weapon that he has.
yeah,
He lost Brady, he lost Le'Veon. Now they have Juju, obviously, but yeah, I feel like they got to get Vance McDonald back. Unless they want to strike gold with one of these other tight ends, but I don't think they will.
yeah. Maybe Jimmy Graham. I could see him going there. Jordan Reed. They're definitely a tight end needy team, but I could also see them digging into the draft class and grabbing one of these guys like Cole Kmet or Bryson Hopkins and just trying to build with a young rookie tight end as well. You want to move to the last guy, Jacob Hollister. Jacob Hollister. So he had a pretty decent season with the Seahawks, and then I think did he break his foot, or was that Will Dissly? I think that was Will Dissly.
It was Disley.
Yeah, Hollister. Let me just pull up his stats real quick. Okay, he 59 targets, 41 receptions, 349 yards, and 3 touchdowns in 10 games. So he filled in nicely, but I think he moves on in 2020 just based on Greg Olsen signing with the Seahawks. If they sign Jordan Reed and a couple other players, I think that's gonna kind of push him out of the depth chart.
Yeah. I mean, he could be an option in Pittsburgh if Pittsburgh doesn't strike anything with Vance McDonald.
Yeah.
I just don't see him being a really high sought out after tight end.
Oh, yeah, definitely
so
not.
When it comes to dynasty leagues, it's tough until you know where a guy like him, where he is going to be.
Yeah. He's definitely a guy that I would watch to see where he signs and then go get him. Or get him now. I mean, he's similar, very low on the in the startup drafts, so you could draft him with your last pick and then see what happens if he gets in a good situation. I mean, he was fairly productive towards the end of the season. He caught some big touchdowns from Russell Wilson, but you also never know. Like he was playing with Russell Wilson, so it could make a difference if you're playing with Jameis Winston or you're playing with Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and it's a person where if he's in Seattle, probably just pass on him.
Yeah.
On what they do. If it's just Greg Olsen, and then they bring Disley and Hollister back as the tight end two battle, then yeah, but if he's back and they have Jordan Reed and Greg Olsen, I would just stay away from him. But.
Right. All right, Bills. Before we hop off, we got a little game for you.
Me?
Me? All right.
For me?
Can you see this well?
Yeah, it's okay.
Let me make it bigger for you. Hang on.
That's what she said. Been watching Office a lot lately. I had to.
Okay, so these are this is over the span of all of these tight ends' careers, and it's the number of weeks that they were either in the top 5, top 12, and all the way down to outside of the top 36 in as far as like tight end scoring. So let's see how many of these 7 names right here, you can line up with the correct bar graph.
Probably 0. Wait, Okay, so. Um.
And I'm not going to tell you the answers until the end.
No, it's fine. All right. Hold on. What am I? So what am I doing again?
Okay, so okay, let's start with we'll give you the easy one. Let's start with the bright green. So
It's the bright green. Is that the first one?
oh sorry, I would say the dark green. The one where it's really tall.
One that's really tall.
Yeah. Okay, so this is saying the number of games in their career that they have been in the top 5 of tight ends, the top 12, top 13, top 25, and then outside of that, as like from
so the green bar represents one player.
Yes, yeah. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
5. There's 7 bars for 7 of these tight ends right here.
Oh, and you think that's the easy one?
Yeah.
No, see.
But, well, think about it. Think about it. Not 2019. Their entire career. So
exactly. So I have a feeling that the green is Jimmy Graham. But I'm also like Hunter Henry has been good for a couple years, so I'm like, but green, give me Jimmy Graham.
All right, I'll tell you that one is correct.
Okay. I guess I got one. Okay. So Jimmy Graham is the green. Let's see. Let's look at the orange. Is the orange? The orange would be Hunter Henry. Nope, it's not. Dang.
No, I don't. Hang on a second. Let me look. Give me 1 second. I forgot where I put my answers.
It's right here on sources. It says answers.
I know, but if I pull them up, then you can see them.
I was trying.
Oh no. Hang on a second. Oh my gosh.
Turn the slide on real quick.
Oh, here we go. Okay, let me pull up the answers here. You can't see this right now, right? The screen that's on. Okay, good. Okay, and what color did you guess?
Orange.
Orange was who? Hunter Henry?
Yeah, but I've been thinking about it.
You want to change your answer?
Yeah, Jordan Reed.
Okay, hang on a second. It's loading. My computer's on overdrive right now. Alright, 5 more seconds. Oh, what the heck? Alright, for sake of time, you guess the next one. Oh, here we go. Wrong on your guess.
On orange?
Yes. It is not. It's not Jordan Reed, nor Hunter Henry.
Neither. Oh crap. Okay. The pink. Let me just wipe this pink one out. Is that Jacob Hollister?
Yes. Nice.
That one was gonna be easy. I felt like. Is it brown? Is that dark brown? The one all the way on the end, the last one?
Yes.
Is that Vance McDonald?
You got it.
All right.
He's on a roll, folks.
The yellow is Jordan Reed.
Bingo. Oh man.
Okay. So what did I say? Orange. So orange is gonna be. Oh. Is orange Ebron?
Orange is Ebron.
Okay. So the blue is going to be Hunter Henry.
Oh.
Nope. I just went with Chargers blue. That's why. I was like, it's blue. Maybe he did. Maybe he wasn't thinking to put the blue. Okay, so blue is Austin Hooper, and
Blue.
the green Hunter Henry.
You got it.
Okay.
There you go. Oh.
Oh, I did get the blue one right.
Oh, that was your
Is
blue?
that-
Oh, that's
Is
purple.
it purple?
That's purple to
Okay,
me.
sorry. Okay, yeah, purple. All right, cool.
Okay, yeah, you're good. Wow, you got all those. Dang. Nice. All right.
Well,
We did it.
yeah, we did.
Any parting
I was gonna
thoughts?
ask a question. I was going to ask a question, but I feel like it'll probably be at a later episode closer to the draft. I was going to say, so I'll just lead it in and say, stay tuned. Because the question I was going to say is something we can address later. Is let's do so for rookie drafts coming up. Who would be your number one quarterback, your number one back, your number one receiver, number one tight end coming into this year's draft? Who would you absolutely buy 100% if you could get, who would you take at each of those positions? If you got the first pick for each of those positions, who would be your guy that you feel like is going to be the guy for the next 10 years, in the NFL to build around? So.
You want me to answer that now? Or that's
No,
for the
I was
next
thinking
episode?
about it, and then I was like, I feel like we can.
Okay. Next episode. I like it. I like it. All right, and then we'll ask the same question to the viewers, and we're gonna post this on YouTube too, so you can drop your quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end in the rookie class in the comments below or in the chat, and we'll give you some feedback on your answers.
Yes, sir.
Jalen Hurt. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts the best quarterback
Yeah.
and running back in the draft.
Yeah. Alrighty. Signing off for the Couch Scouts podcast. Follow us on Instagram. We're at the Couch Scouts Pod. And you follow Anthony on Twitter. DAT _ dude _ AB. And you can follow me on Twitter at KOTS Fantasy. So hit us up, ask us questions, and if you have any Dynasty questions, for sure, over the off season, we'd love to get those answered. And we'll talk with you guys on the next episode.
Peace.